Yeah, and I mean, I'm gonna say a statement that may, get me canceled, but I like we're apparently in like one of the busiest sections of our city, and it's really easy to park.
I'm going to clip the controversial part of this where you say it's easy to park in Minneapolis and get you canceled.
I feel like I qualified that with a lot of
You did.
things
I'm gonna cut out the
but
qualifications and only the incendiary part about how easy it is to park in the city. People will be so upset.
We're rolling. We're rolling.
Calling all cat people. This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
So what spicy thing did you just eat?
a sambusa.
Did you make it yourself? Is it something you got from someplace?
No, I got it from Bole Express on Franklin. And it wasn't even that spicy. I don't know. Just when I don't know, if something kind of goes down the wrong way. It was like a little bit spicy.
Just it's kind of hit you wrong. Okay, well, I don't
Yeah.
think I've talked to a state legislator before. Apologies if I have and I've forgotten you, but you may be my first.
Like never in your life or never on the podcast?
Well, that's a good question. Have I in my life? I probably have in real life, but I think it's the first time on the podcast. It's kind of amazing. I'm so focused on local politics that this is going to be a new experience for me here.
Well, all politics is local politics, right?
I believe in that, yeah. Okay, we're here on the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards, and my guest is Minnesota State Rep Samantha Sencer-Mura in
Nice.
District 63A, which is kind of a...
Good pronunciation of my last name.
Do people get it wrong? How do they get it wrong?
People usually just stop and like don't even try, which is maybe good. Like, I think people just look at it and they're like, I don't know. Or people say when people write it, people often write Spencer. So people just add a P.
Spell check, maybe. I got the spell check tried to have me do Spencer, but I didn't. We're here to talk about mostly transportation, but I thought I would start since you're a Minneapolis resident. You lived through the last few years, and we just had an election. Do you have a reaction to the election we just had? Some of the things you've been thinking about this year and maybe what you think are the recent election results mean for the city?
Yeah, I mean, this is so core. This is so core. I don't know why this is in my head, but for some reason, the phrase "the audacity of hope" is coming to mind. Which I'm sure that when Barack Obama wrote that book, he was talking about Minneapolis politics and the range of Democratic leadership that we have here. But I feel good. I feel really. I mean, we're a week out, and it is interesting to represent Minneapolis, but on the state level, but still be often really affected by what is happening in the city, oftentimes have to answer for what's happening in the city. And so I feel heartened by the election results, especially, 2021 was a hard election. I remember I was supposed to go to the Gold Room for the Yes on Two, what I think maybe was going to be a celebration, and then started talking to friends that were there, and they're like, maybe just don't, it's not necessarily a super celebratory vibe. So I went to Oreen Chowdhury's party on Tuesday, and I had that same trepidation, like, oh, what is this gonna be like? Am I gonna regret coming here? And it was joyful. It was exciting. She won on the first ballot. We got the results early. So I'm feeling good. I am jealous of St. Paul, and I don't really like that feeling. But I think we're in a good place, and we're moving in a good direction.
St. Paul elected the nation's first all-woman city council. Imagine that.
I know. And like I was on social media the week before the election and I saw like Mayor Carter and Mitra Jalali and Representative Maria Perez Vega like all playing basketball together and I was just like, wow, like so quaint and nice over here. I can't imagine a bunch of Minneapolis politicians, playing sports together. But maybe it will happen.
So somebody should invite me to play basketball. I'd like to play basketball. I haven't played in years, but I'd like to play more basketball. I'm tall. I'd be a good addition to anyone's team.
Maybe you can start I know it's not called bipartisan because we're all Democrats, but maybe you can start the annual bipartisan in terms of Minneapolis spectrums of Democrats basketball tournament, and it can be a way to bring more unity to our city.
It's true. We do bike rides. Maybe we can do a basketball podcast or something. We do have political parties now. We have all of Minneapolis. We label our political parties by the names of the PACs. That's kind of sad. Minneapolis for the many and all of Minneapolis. That's how MinPost is labeling their maps to describe the divide. There's some flaws with measuring it that way because not every ward was competitive. But
I also was watching some stuff about the park board vote last night, and it was definitely, with the park board, you have the 18-hole, you have the 9-hole, you have the sex forest fringe group. So, that's another way that you can name political parties in Minneapolis.
Yeah, it's true. That's a good call. Park board has weird political parties too. Okay, let's get to what we were supposed to talk about here, which is transportation. And so what inspired this is Kate Mortensen was on, and we were riding bikes on Bryan Avenue. She was running for Ward 13 at the time and mentioned camera enforcement because we were talking about what is the answer? Is it street reengineering? And she brought up the idea of camera enforcement as a way to get people not to drive in dangerous ways. And you are sponsoring the camera enforcement bill at the state legislature coming up. Is that correct?
Yes. So I sponsored it. I introduced it last session. Still working on it for this session. And I will say that I reached out to you about coming on, both about that, and I was also listening to Councilmember Payne, your bike ride episode, and he also mentioned the Idaho stop, and he couldn't
he
remember.
flubbed that real bad.
Yeah, and so I was like, okay, we need to get some state representation on Wedge Live because I'm hearing, city folks misquoting or not totally understanding the state law, and I've heard you be like, I don't even touch state law, and I'm like, well, if you care about transportation, I think there's some things for you at the state.
That's why you're here. So tell me all about camera enforcement and why you think it's necessary, why you're sponsoring it.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start out with I'm not an expert on this bill. This bill is not, what I went to the state legislature for, and I still have a decent amount of reservations about the bill. So I'll kind of talk through all of that. The bill, this is a bill that the city of Minneapolis is really pushing for. The city of Minneapolis, and I think their office of Project Zero or, towards zero deaths. This is one of the big initiatives that they are pushing for. I think, based on a lot of research about how to keep our streets safer, specifically with kind of the rise in reckless driving, speeding that we have seen, since COVID. And so they see the opportunity to start using speed safety cameras or red light cameras as kind of part of their vision for how we make our streets safer. So it was brought to me. It's a bill that is kind of, this happens with a number of bills. They can kind of rattle around the state legislature for a while, but not necessarily go anywhere. So I'm not the first person to author this bill. So I think, one of the first things that come up when people hear this bill is that if you lived in the Twin Cities maybe 15 years ago, or if you lived in Minneapolis 15 years ago, they piloted red light cameras. And so I was a teenager at that time. I think I actually got a ticket. And at that time, they were using a camera that actually took a picture of your face. So you would get something in the mail and it had I remember mine was like a very unflattering photo of me like running a red light. And so, it'd say like, this is you. We know this is you. This is a picture of you running this red light, and now you're going to get a fine. So I don't totally understand the mechanics of it, but that got challenged. And they basically found that it was against state law for Minneapolis to enact that. So this piece of legislation is to give cities, or I think other jurisdictions, kind of the ability to put in their own either speeding or red light camera laws. The law would be different than how it was 15 years ago, in that it would not be taking a picture of you. I think that brings up a lot of privacy concerns. Instead, it would be connected to your car and to your license plate,
Right.
which also brings up some different concerns in that, let's say, John, I'm your friend and I'm borrowing your car, and then like, how do we kind of figure that out? I think the reasons for passing a law like this are, both the safety measures. I think there are also some people that believe that, the less interaction we have between police and residents, especially around, kind of issues that we would see as maybe more smaller issues, is better, right? Especially when we have a police department that has the reputation that they do. I think also I've heard in Minneapolis right now, and we're hearing so much about, just lack of police capacity, that it's kind of like police at this point are not necessarily pulling people over for speeding. And so people are feeling like there's kind of no mechanism for controlling or accountability. In researching the law, there are other cities that have done this. A big one that comes up often when you're doing research is Chicago. And what happened in Chicago was two things that I think are really important for Minneapolis to think about if we are going to enact this law. One, they found that it did, there was reduction in accidents, in speed, however they measure that. So it did accomplish some of the traffic safety measures it was trying to. They also found that it was discriminatory towards people of color, right? People of color are more likely to get these tickets, and then because they had a system that kind of escalated with the fines, then more likely to get into a place where your $100 fine is now $1,000, or you rack up multiple fines, and to a point where it could be really financially burdensome for people. So those are kind of the two things I think we're weighing when we think about this bill. The reality is that our streets in low-income neighborhoods, in neighborhoods that have a higher percentage of people of color, are generally just built less safe, right? And so there's more speeding that happens there. And so if we were looking around the city thinking, where should we put speed safety cameras, we would put them, right, in, streets in North Minneapolis where people drive like they're driving on a freeway, right? We wouldn't put it, at the corner of Lake Harriet because no one is speeding there. So it feels like there's kind of this bias that could almost be built into it because it's built into our streets. So
Right.
I'm really for all of the additional things we can do to redesign our streets and make them safer. And, I think I'm thinking in the meantime, is this one measure that we can put in place?
So how do you balance that? Because you're right, the streets are worse in lower income neighborhoods that are majority people of color. And so the argument will be, well, we need these cameras even more here because the streets are so dangerous. It works, and so let's do it. But then the equity concern of the people who will be getting the tickets, therefore, because they live and drive through these neighborhoods, are lower income people and people of color. Is what can be built into it to mitigate that, do you think?
Yeah. So, a couple things that we're building in. One is, this bill is going to have a lot of local control, right? So at the state level, we're just saying that cities have the opportunity to put these laws in place. They're not forced to. And so we're kind of putting into the bill that the city will have to go through some kind of community engagement process around what their law will look like, how they will decide where they're going to put the cameras. I think there's some thought about like the cameras should be placed, like close to schools or things like that. And so having community engagement to see if there's community buy-in for this kind of thing. The other thing that we're thinking about is just how do you not have this escalating fine system, right? Because the hope is that, someone gets a fine or gets one or two fines and then changes their behavior. And so should they still be on the hook for a fine that has then grown to $1,000? No. So, we, I think, are starting the fines at $40, which seems like a relatively reasonable fine. I think the first time people get like a warning letter in the mail before even getting the fine, and then we're putting in a system so it can't escalate. So a $40 fine can't eventually become a $1,000 fine. So those are the ideas that we have so far. I'm still very open to hearing feedback from folks. There's a whole other set of issues that people have concerns about the privacy portion of this. And I think those, and growing the surveillance state. And I think those are real. And at the same time, I have a toddler and I live on a street that doesn't feel safe. And those are the things I'm thinking about.
Something that has been a topic around the idea of just generally traffic fees and fines and tickets is like basing those dollar amounts on your ability to pay. Mm-hmm. Because a $200 ticket for one person is like, wow, this ruins my year. And for someone else, it's nothing. And I'm going to be racking up these tickets all the time because I don't care. It's nothing to me. Mm-hmm. Does the state have the ability to do a graduated system like that? I think it's like maybe a European thing.
Yeah, I think we have talked about something like that. I do think then I think questions have come up about like logistics of how would you be able to determine what someone can pay? Like, what systems would you need to talk to each other to do that? But I do think that that's something that we're talking about or thinking about.
I've done a little bit of reading on it, and it sounds like this is very effective. Some people say, well, you're going to have more of those like rear end type crashes at intersections where people like, I better stop for this red light, and the person behind them doesn't realize it, and you've got a fender bender. But those are less serious than those high speed 3 seconds after the red light has come on kind of T-bone crashes at intersections that are really bad. So I tend to believe it's effective. Do you have anything to say about like the effectiveness of this? Do you have an argument to convince people like this? No, this really is effective. We should do it.
Yeah, I think I've read the same things as you, is that I do think they found it to be effective. I do think there will have to be like education campaigns for letting people know about the lights and having signs up and things like that. And I think we'll probably need to think about like the best way to put those in place so that, maybe people are just generally aware that any red light could have this, and so people are being safe at all red lights versus just seeing the sign and then all of a sudden stopping really hastily. Again, I go back to street design, right? That is the goal. I think about like I live right off Cedar, right? Really poorly designed street. Every couple blocks you will see some kind of memorial to someone who has lost their life because of the bad design of that street, and then the kind of driving behavior that it incentivizes. And and they're going to redo that street, but there's a big sign on Cedar right now that says reconstruction coming in 2026, right? And there's going to be a whole community engagement process about what that looks like, and so that's great, but that doesn't that does not make me feel better in the interim. So, I see this as a short-term solution. And I want to make sure that the city and the state are also doing other traffic calming measures, right? I live right off of 17th. 32nd and 17th, where they put in a roundabout, which I know is controversial. Not everyone likes roundabout, but, it's a roundabout where I think it was neighbors or something put in this big Prince sculpture. And so I actually find that like people don't like roundabouts, but if you put something that's cool and interesting and adds to the neighborhood, if you go to Lake of the Isles, their roundabouts are like beautiful gardens, that I think actually people like them and appreciate them in the neighborhood. So I want to make sure that like while we're trying out this solution, which has kind of is both effective and has its drawbacks in terms of surveillance and other things, that we're also doing other traffic safety and calming measures.
Is there a way to direct the money collected to traffic calming projects in specific neighborhoods? Like the neighborhoods where the money is being collected? Yeah. Is that a way to like mitigate the equity problem a little bit?
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I don't know. Yeah, it would be interesting to run the projections on that and see like how much money we would actually anticipate. And I don't know if, when you're starting, so at the state, I mean, one of the things that's cool is that we can, we have researchers that can kind of do the studies for us and kind of project these things out. So I wonder what they would say about how much you could anticipate, raising from these things. I have no idea if it would, be a large sum of money, but I think that's a good idea.
Oh, another, I watched a YouTube video that was kind of like maybe a little bit negative on traffic cameras. I didn't altogether agree with, but one problem I think that's come up is that private companies get involved and they like enter into deals with municipalities. So they get a portion of the fees and fines, which creates an incentive to like catch more people doing things that are like questionably a problem. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Have you thought about that at all?
So that has come up in a couple of different spaces. One thing that I understand, and this is kind of, I've heard from people in the way more in kind of the data privacy world about this, which is not my area of expertise. So I'm definitely learning, but there are license plate readers, and those, I think that is somehow connected to a system where, let's say, you are looking for someone who the police are looking for, and you put out the license plate, and then the camera would be able to read the license plate and somehow ping, the local police or something. This will not be connected to a license plate reader system because of kind of privacy concerns. So I think that's one place that comes up. It's not going to be, like, you can't use this to do anything else besides just see if people are running red lights or speeding. So it's not just putting cameras and the cameras will be catching everything or anything like that. I think the second place that this has come up is, so who will actually be looking over the footage? If if a camera pings or, then records that someone actually did run a red light, who is kind of going through this and then figuring out how to administer the fine and all of that. And the current bill says that it will not be law enforcement. I think that I've heard from folks who are kind of on both sides of the debate. I mean, I think at this point in Minneapolis, it doesn't feel like we have the capacity for law enforcement to be doing this. But I've heard from people who like that version, that think, yes, police should not be involved in this, or people that say, like, for privacy reasons, police should be the only people involved in this. I think if you don't have police involved, maybe that's where you have to potentially partner with another third-party company, or do you create a new department, like a new part of a city department to do this? I think those are things that would have to be figured out.
Yeah. I'm a little bit, so I am very supportive of the idea, but I think concerns about like this being a cash grab for cities, just looking to like sweep up as many people violating traffic laws as possible, as opposed to like focusing on the really, really dangerous behavior, could maybe be a little bit of a concern.
Yeah, I mean, and if you read about it, like cities like Chicago have gotten a lot of, complaints against them because a lot of pushback because of the kind of idea of like, yeah, this is a cash grab for cities. So that's not the intention with this bill. I don't believe that that's what the city is that's why the city cares about this bill. I think that we have people that are dying on our streets, right? And right. This is one of the things that we can do to make the streets a little safer.
Okay, now it's time for a new segment on the Wedge Live podcast called Shame on You, Elliot Payne, for not knowing traffic laws.
And then now, thanks to Bill Dooley, we can actually take this because I don't see anybody coming.
Really? Is that applied to red lights?
Yes, the Idaho stop.
I thought it only applied to stop signs.
The Idaho stop is treating stop signs as yield and then stop lights as stop signs.
I didn't know that.
Well, you might have to fact check me on how Minnesota implemented it.
I might have to. We may have just broken a law.
Correct, Elliot Payne.
Yeah, so the law that we passed says that if there is no cars, you can go, and you're on a bike, you can go through a stop sign. I think other states, and I don't know why we didn't include this, and maybe it's, potential for legislation moving forward. Other states say that if it's a stoplight and there are no cars, you can treat it as a yield. So I think what he was saying, I think you two were writing, and he was saying we can just yield here and then go through, because there was no cars, I'm guessing, at that intersection. Our law does not touch stop sign or stop lights at all. So
Okay.
that's something that could be worked on in future sessions.
Do you think they will?
I don't know. To me, it seems like a logical thing. I mean, my guess could be that maybe, it's kind of an incremental change, right? They said, let's start with the stop signs. Let's see how that rolls out. Let's see how people react to it. Let's see if, it brings up any safety concerns. And maybe once we have some data about that or have some feedback, then it's something we can push for in the future.
So I watched that interview you did that I mentioned before with like the House's YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
They put out an interview with you, and you mentioned that it's not necessarily your lifestyle to go. You have a car, you're driving everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm. For the most part.
The idea of not owning a car, right, and living in a society that's less car-centric, like as someone who grew up driving, that's harder for me, right? But there's a lot of young people I know who are like, that's the way of the future, like, come on. Yeah. And let's get there. And
it's not necessarily your lifestyle, but you're thinking about those people, and I'm just wondering, why are you thinking about those people? Have you always thought about those people who need transportation alternatives? Is it recent? Because I'm always curious, like, what motivates people to start thinking about transportation differently? Like, has it been a lifelong thing? Was it while you were campaigning? What spurred your interest?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think that's an interesting question. And I will say, like, I've been a little bit intimidated coming into the policy advocacy space around transportation because there are a lot of people who, like, this is what they live and breathe. And so right. I also find that there's like a little a Venn diagram of kind of like bro culture and transportation policy. And, I'm one of, I think 3 women on the transportation committee, and a lot of the lobbyists and the people that work in this space are men. So I think there's a little bit of intimidation coming into this space. But I would say that my interest stems from I grew up in Minneapolis. I grew up in the district I represent. I lived away for 10 years. I lived in California. I lived in a couple cities on the East Coast, just that all had better public transportation systems. And for 5 years that I was living in different places, I didn't have a car. I went to college in LA without a car. So I actually experienced probably a worse transportation system without a car. But then I lived in New York and the Bay Area and Boston and places that have a much more robust public transportation system. And so even, for example, when I lived in Boston and I had a car, I would still go half my week without using my car, right? And there was a lot of things that were walkable. I lived right by the train stop. And then I moved back to Minneapolis and was just kind of once again inundated with like how almost like our expectations around car culture here, I think we are lucky in that we're a small enough city that traffic is never like that terrible, right? I mean, I think about like when I'm complaining about traffic here and I'm stuck for like 10 minutes, I'm like, this is terrible, right? And then I think about people in LA who are in traffic for like an hour and a half a day. And I'm like, I think that this is a pretty comfortable city to drive in. And I think that there's like so many ways our city would be better if we didn't drive as much in the short term, right? Like I think about when I was in New York and I took the train all the time, I was healthier. I liked to read on the train. I got more reading done. I think that I've heard you talk about this. I think it's much more enjoyable to spend, 30 minutes on a train ride generally than it is to spend, stuck in traffic. So I think about it from like immediate positive benefits. And then I think really for me, it's like the climate issue, right? And, what I say is that one of the issues that I feel like we have to be working on at all levels of government right now is climate change. Energy policy is really confusing to me. Like when someone starts talking to me about it, my brain just like shuts down. And so transportation is just I can just understand it a little more. I'm like, we just need to, we need to cut down on greenhouse gas. How do we do that? Less cars on the road, less people driving. In a city, I think, the choices that we make are a lot easier than folks in greater Minnesota. And so, yeah, I think I've really come to the place that like we have to push ourselves in the Twin Cities to build differently, to think differently about our decisions around transportation. I think it's what's good for us in the short term. I think it's what's good for us in the long term. And the reality is lots of people right now don't have cars, right? And so like lots of people are reliant on our public transportation system and feel its failures immediately. And so that's something that we need to work on. But I guess, short answer, like aspirationally, I would like to drive less and I want to make it easier for me to do that.
Yeah, it's all about you. I agree with you that the energy bros, they're the real bros. I never understand what the energy bros are talking about. I can understand riding the bus, making it easier and safer to ride a bike. I cannot understand the energy stuff. I'm with you.
Yeah.
A funny story about transportation recently was the whole turnstile thing at light rail stations. And that's related to, it's not just like we want to get all this fare money. It's not about money, I don't think. It's about safety is the way it's being framed. Yeah. And I laugh at that story so hard at the idea of turnstiles keeping anyone off of a light rail platform, because these are at ground level, at street level, and you could just walk up the tracks and it's like 9 inches to get up to the platform. I don't know if that's my question, but generally about light rail safety, like what do you think we should be, are turnstiles or closing the stations like a viable thing? Do you think? What do you think could be effective? What's worth doing here?
Yeah. I don't think that they are viable. I think when I've heard people kind of price them out to what it would actually be, it doesn't seem like a good investment. I think you're right. It's not about raising more money from our public transportation systems. It's really depressing when we're in committee and we look at different rail systems that we have in the metro. And I'm trying to remember what the phrase is, but it's like the fee box return, like the return on investment, basically like how much are you making compared to how much you spent on something. And the one that Republicans always love to cite, I think, is North Star, the commuter rail. It's like our deficit is like 200%, right? I mean, right. There's no system in which we are getting, that fares are paying for the full, build out and implementation of these systems. And I don't think that is correct for us to hope for. The safety issues are real. I would say that this is like one of the issues that constituents in my first session reached out to me the most about. I have 3 light rail stations within my district, one of them being Lake and Hiawatha, which has just kind of been ongoing violence, lots of drug use happening, some really, awful specific incidents of violence against a trans woman. And so, we've had community gatherings, we've had hearings about this. I mean, the stories that people are telling, I kind of think about them on the range from people are going on public transportation, usually the light rail, right? Buses are usually better, and that's because we have just a figure there, right? Like an unarmed figure who is It's always like, I have a lot of respect for bus drivers. I have a lot of respect for bus drivers of public transportation. I also, from working in schools, have so much respect for school bus drivers, because it's like they are both driving this large piece of machinery and are like this safety guard, right? Like they are bringing a level of safety, whether it's a school bus, whether it's a public city bus. They bring a level of safety just by kind of their presence and, and then anything else that they might do. So what we really see is, light rails where there is not that kind of conductor person who's on every car. And, the stories that people would tell about their experiences on the light rail largely, since COVID and as people are kind of starting to come back to using the light rail more often, I would say they range from discomfort to real danger, right? And so when I say discomfort, sometimes I've heard people bring up music on a train, right? And I'm like, well, part of that, in my opinion, and I've been challenged this, part of that, in my opinion, is you're just out in the world, right? You're out in the world, you're interacting with people. This is not, your personal bubble of a car. And And to me, and I know everyone agrees, like that's part of what makes it beautiful. That's part of what makes it interesting. In New York City, people making music on a train, right, is one of the things that generally people enjoy. So, I hear people talking about like misconduct as in somebody playing music without putting headphones on. I'm like, that's discomfort, right? All the way to like real dangerous situations. People are smoking fentanyl, right? And you have your kid on the train and you're worried about that, right? People who are, going through a mental health breakdown and are naked on a train, right? So we've talked a lot about what we can do, and I think we've looked to a lot of other cities because we're not alone in this. Kind of all cities coming out of COVID are going through this to some degree. I think the piece of how do we put more kind of eyes on the situation, have that presence that you have on buses that you don't have on light rail. How do we put that presence there? And how do we make sure that that is not adding a kind of enforcement that could potentially be dangerous to people, specifically unhoused people, right? When we are talking about, how do we care for our constituents? How do we make places safer? Like, I know that the constituents that are unhoused, that are maybe, riding the light rail and getting on at 31st and Hiawatha, like those are also my constituents, right? And I also have to think about their safety. And the reality is like we don't have enough places that folks can go. I think especially in the winter when it's really cold, in the summer when it's really hot, the light rail is one of the few places that is like has some kind of air temperature control. So, I think there's the outside piece of like, how do we build more places for unhoused folks to go, or folks that are struggling with mental health or with addiction issues? And, how do we make our transportation systems safer for all riders, because we want more people to come back. We want more people to use this. We want to incentivize people. One of the things that Minneapolis is talking about is that by 2030, they want to have, I think it's 6 out of 10 trips to be non-car. And so to do that, like we have to incentivize people to use the infrastructure and the light rail that we already have. So something that we are piloting, is, I think the name is trip personnel. So these are going to be unarmed individuals, not part of law enforcement, who are going to be riding the trains, who are going to be, asking people for fares, enforcing fares. I think, again, some of the same concerns come up about fines. And so I think that the bill has done some work that program has done some work to ensure that we're not like placing inexorbitant fines on people who are riding and giving them a chance to just buy a ticket versus fine them if they don't have a ticket. But to also be there to, connect people to services, to, let people know about shelters. If someone is having some kind of mental health crisis, connect them. So we are just, I believe, piloting that beginning of next year. I was just at a conference meeting at the U of M Transportation Center where they were talking about, I'm trying to remember the city. I think it was Pittsburgh that had done something similar. Something they talked about that I found really exciting was they had partnered with a med school in Pittsburgh to have med students riding the train and offering what they called street medicine. So, they literally talked about wrapping people's wounds on the train or things like that. So I think that there's other things that we can build in. But I think this trip personnel is a start. And I know that, for my constituents, I felt like we had to be trying something.
Yeah. What I have noticed riding transit is the light rail has gotten worse and riding the bus feels as good as ever. And so definitely having someone there, having staff on the light rail, I think is a very promising potential solution.
And I think can those people be, I think of, I'm not sure what, there's a poem that a lot of people were talking about in 2020 from Janata Petrus around, can we give the police department to the grandmothers? I guess I think about this in this way too, can we give the light rail to the grandmothers? Can they be friendly, sweet people who are connecting you to services, who are making you feel welcome. I know one of the terms for this role that we were throwing around at one point was an ambassador, right? And And I think there's a piece of it too, is like someone who's also like skilled at riding public transportation that could tell you like, get off at this stop if you want to transfer to the 21,
Right.
or, you know, this, you're coming from the airport, this is how you get downtown.
Yeah.
And I would love to see these people be like our biggest advocates for transit, right? You know, I think about like someone like that I know you are a fan of, like Amity Foster, right? Who's just like welcoming, caring, cares about transit, can help kind of cheerlead. I'm not sure if they are interested in the role, but that kind of person, that would make me feel better about the program that we're building.
Yeah, and success breeds success. So the more people you have riding transit, the safer people feel riding transit. And nobody wants to get on an empty train car late at night. It can feel weird and dangerous if you're not used to it. And so it doesn't even have to be people who are there in an enforcement role. You're right. Just having someone there who can help you with anything can make people feel safer. And if people start feeling safer, more people are riding transit. And just by virtue of more people riding transit, everything is safer. It'd be nice to get out of the feeling of death spiral of people going away. And ridership is up, so
Ridership is
good.
I think safety, the last Star Tribune article I saw was up, and the program hasn't even started. So hopefully we're on a good track. Minneapolis is back, baby.
Yeah, Minneapolis is back, baby. Let's talk about the Greenway connection to St. Paul. Tell me when it's happening. You're promising that it will be happening, right?
I'm not at all. I think we authorized funding for a study. So that is the first potential step. So this is the bridge that could connect the Greenway with kind of some of the grand rounds, the bikes in St. Paul. I know I used to, in a not very safe way, go on that bridge as a kid, because I lived in Prospect Park. I had a lot of friends who lived in Seward. We would walk over the...
Really? Was it not closed off?
No,
Was it not
so
fenced off?
I want to say when I was a teenager, there was a big fire, probably because maybe people were on it and not being super safe. It was not like a breeding ground for safe behavior, I will say. It was not a safe place to be walking or biking or anything. But I think mainly young people used to walk on it, and then there was a fire. Then they shut it off. So this was even before the Greenway was in place. Now we're talking about, looking into a study that could reopen that so it could be a walking, biking path connecting the two cities. As I understand it, this is something that kind of various levels of government, different jurisdictions have been looking at for a while. I think there was a moment where Hennepin County was very involved. I think one of the barriers is the railroad company owns the bridge right now, and I've been told uses it very infrequently. Yeah, it's a study to kind of see what kind of potential paths we could have, and to start, I think, the conversation with the railroad company about, how the county or some other jurisdiction could buy that land and then connect the cities.
This train to Duluth, I hear the criticism is no one will ride it because no one would be crazy enough to ride the train to Duluth. When they get off the train, how do you get around Duluth?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing I heard was like, Duluth is nice for 2 months out of the year. Who's going to want to go there?
Yeah, they say that about Minneapolis, too.
That's true.
So.
Yeah, I mean, so this is an existing track that used to go to Duluth. It is not a high-speed rail, which is part of the reason that they anticipate they could actually, finish the construction in a pretty limited time. I want to say 3 years. And this would, I think it would cost $25 for a ticket to go there. I believe that Duluth is also a city that is looking to make itself less car-centric, right? I visit Duluth. My in-laws live in Duluth. We go there a few times a year. I would love to take the train there instead. I don't love the drive. I do think that there are things that you can do in Duluth that don't require a car. I was just in Japan and got to take the bullet train, and you can be anywhere in the country, right, within a number of hours. And it's really pleasant. You get to look outside. So I'm for it. In the U.S., we are so behind in in our rail system as a viable way of travel. But I think, again, from like I know people are not flying to Duluth, but if we can, get a train to Chicago, like I think when people are thinking about ways that their transportation use connects to climate change, flying is a big part of it, right? And so the more that we can incentivize building rail, bringing back rail, I think the better. So I think that's one piece of it. And I do believe that you can get around to Duluth without a car.
I've never been there, and so I wonder, because people will say, well, I can't get around like downtown and the Wedge and uptown without a car. Like I'm routinely walking like 5 blocks for things, and it's nice. And I wonder if that's the mentality people are bringing to Duluth. Like, really, you can't do anything? You get off a train in Duluth and there's nothing to do? I assume it's like an older, compact city. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I mean, there's a downtown, I think like our downtown and like downtowns across the country, there's like revitalization efforts there. It's hillier than Minneapolis, so you're going to be walking in more hills. I've heard people say Duluth is the San Francisco of the Midwest, so it has some hills that maybe make walking a little bit harder, but I would encourage folks to try to go to Duluth and not have a car and see if it's possible.
So rethinking 94, do you have any thoughts about the Twin Cities Boulevard thing?
Yeah.
Where the group of advocates from our streets and others want to basically remove 94 and make it a boulevard with car traffic and bus lanes and no longer a trench. You got thoughts?
Yeah, so I was the author for a bill that we did not make a lot of progress on, but was to do a feasibility study about the Twin Cities Boulevard. But there is still kind of ongoing work from the Minnesota Department of Transportation around rethinking 94. So 94 needs to be redone. And so MnDOT is going through a process. They are at the point in the process right now where they're proposing a number of alternatives, keeping 94 as it is. There is one option that I'm not a fan of expanding the lanes. And then there are what they're calling at-grade options, which is where it's not a highway, it's a street, and the Twin Cities Boulevard could fit into one of those options. I heard about the Twin Cities Boulevard when I was running for office. It's not something I knew about previously, and I came around to the idea for a few reasons. I mean, one, I think like our country has a history of using highways to racially discriminate against people and to basically kill thriving neighborhoods of people of color. I think that's a history that we need to be reckoning with. That's a history that we need to be, thinking about as we think about any highway project. When this past session, we also passed a piece of legislation around reducing vehicles miles traveled and saying that any state project moving forward that expands highways will have to have some kind of mitigation, like they'll have to do a mitigation project to make up for that. So the state level, we're trying to, disincentivize building more highways. I think there's good evidence that shows that expanding highways does not reduce traffic time. It doesn't actually accomplish that if your goal is, to reduce traffic time. When I talk to people, I don't really hear people complaining too much about traffic on 94, so I don't really think that's a place we should be making decisions from. I'm really excited by what I see as the potential for land use development with a boulevard option, right? I think when you think about shops or, building up more kind of economically vibrant communities, like I think freeways are not helpful in that arena. So I'm a proponent of it. I will say, like, it is something I learned recently was that there has never been a highway that is as frequently traveled as 94 that has done kind of a highway decommission. Additionally, there are some things that make the stretch of 94 that we're talking about, which is, I believe from like Cedar Riverside to I want to say like the Capitol, basically. Like there's some things that make that unique in that it's a highway that then has like a bridge and then it connects with 280. And so like, it's not just one kind of piece of freeway. It has these different intersections that I think could make an at-grade option, you know, unique. And I will say like, this is an area that when I bring it up to both some of my colleagues at the legislature and some constituents that like feels, far outside the Overton window. But like we can be moving it. I think, you know, this would just kind of be the most robust highway decommission project, I think, in the US. And there's a lot of political will that we are going to have to build if we're gonna move in this direction.
You're talking like a transportation bro here. Who said you were not enmeshed in this topic? So, to give people an idea of how much prep I put into this episode, I asked you what we should be talking about, and you told me the VMT Reduction Bill. And I have to admit, I don't know if that's a past bill, if it's a future bill. Did we do something at the state level? Are we doing something at the state level about vehicle miles traveled is the acronym? Are we reducing? Are we doing that?
So we are asking MnDOT projects to kind of meet goals around reducing vehicles miles traveled, and as part of that is what I just spoke about with trying to de-incentivize highway expansion statewide.
Okay, I have read a little bit about that. It's good that we're taking that into consideration with our.
I will say it's one of the bills. Like I don't totally understand the details of it, but it's one of those bills that people tell me like this is monumental, this is very historic, this will kind of change everything, and people that understand these things way more than I do say that to me, and so I'm like, yeah, cool.
I think so. It's comparable to what the city has done with the whole reducing car trips thing. Like that is motivating other policies. And like, it's important to have policies on paper that you can point to support your priorities. Like once you have that underpinning of that first policy, a lot of good things can flow from that. So exciting news. And I'm sorry for being mostly unaware of this.
And I think generally, like when the city is talking about, reducing car trips, when the state is talking about it, like, I think we have to, always kind of balance this like carrot and stick approach, right? Like the stick approach is like, if you're going to expand a highway, you have to do a mitigation project, like all these things. What I worry sometimes is that we are maybe too much of the stick and not enough of the carrot, right? Like I have sometimes, when Minneapolis keeps talking about, 6 out of 10 trips by 2030, and I think people hear that, they're like, wow, that feels really soon, and that feels like a lot of trips that I'm going to be making differently. Like I think that we as government entities have to be like, and these are all the policies that we are passing to make that easier for you to do it. It's not like things are exactly the way they are now, but you just can't, half your trips have to be walking, right? Because then I hear people say like, you want me to walk 2 miles to work every day? And it's like, no, right? That's not what we're saying. We are trying to build bus rapid transit. So your trip to work that you could take on a bus right now that might be 50 minutes will be 30 minutes. Like we have to back it up with all the things that we're doing to make it easier for people so that it doesn't become a just like, sorry, you can't do this thing that makes your life easier anymore.
I'm going to use a very incendiary phrase, social engineering, which means creating the environment that allows people to choose these things. Like it's not going to be in the law that you as an individual must get around the city this way. It's still going to be really easy to drive. As you said, driving is so easy. And I imagine it will be for my entire lifetime here in the Twin Cities, but giving people choices to where it's like more comfortable and convenient and enjoyable to travel in other ways, that's how we will reduce the vehicle miles traveled, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm going to say a statement that may, get me canceled, but I like parking is another thing that I think, there's lots of narratives and some built around parking and losing parking. But, like I just had this experience a couple weeks ago. I was going with my partner. We went to dinner in the North Loop, and then we went to the Guthrie, and we found a parking spot right in front of our dinner restaurant. We found a parking spot right in front of the Guthrie, right? And this is not to minimize that there are some places in the city where it's very hard to park, but I'm like, we're apparently in like one of the busiest sections of our city, and it's really easy to park. Like, and I understand, like, I'm an able-bodied younger person, so there are privileges that I have around parking. But I just think that there also might be some, like, change in expectations that we can have, or, like, maybe it doesn't need to be that easy for me to go to, like, you know, the busiest theater in town and get a parking spot right in front.
I'm going to clip the controversial part of this where you say it's easy to park in Minneapolis and get you canceled.
I feel like I qualified that with a lot of
You did. I'm going to cut out the qualifications and only the incendiary part about how easy it is to park in the city. People will be so upset.
I'm just admitting, people are going to then tell me, like, every single place where it's not easy to park.
You're going to be a hot topic on Nextdoor. There's going to be a Nextdoor thread about you.
I never go on it. I don't even touch it. I was told recently, this is another thing I don't know, that, like, there's also Minneapolis Reddit, though. You can really go.
Oh, I really enjoy that. Maybe enjoy is too strong, but I'm frequently on it. And I don't know. I feel like it's like kind of a replacement for Twitter for me in a little bit of way. I only read, I don't post, but it keeps you abreast of what is in the news. It's kind of a decent news feed. See what the buzz is a little bit.
Someone told me, like, does Andrew Johnson post on Reddit?
Oh yeah, Andrew Johnson
told me that he's,
which
like,
is
a
amazing.
very active, like, they're like, I think it was talking about, like, well, if you really want to get an answer from him, like, you know, post on Reddit, like, start a Reddit thread about it.
Well, he's very accessible. It doesn't matter what, you could be on Tumblr, you could hear from Andrew Johnson. He's everywhere. So sad to see you go, Andrew Johnson.
We'll miss your Reddit threads.
Yeah. Hey, maybe he will stay on. Maybe he'll change his handle from CM Andrew Johnson to just Andrew Johnson. Do you have any recommendations? What are you enjoying? Do you have any hobbies, like media that you're enjoying? Like when you want to unwind and relax and be happy, what do you do? Maybe it could be a walk someplace, anything you could recommend to people.
Yeah, I mean, I have a 2-year-old, so I feel like I have a lot of joy in my life. I do think that is the benefit of being a parent. I think I feel a lot more stress on the daily than I did, but I also feel a lot more joy. Since having a kid, something I have, like, rediscovered or reaffirmed my appreciation for is libraries. I think I like the concept of libraries, but I've never been good at returning them on time. And then I just kind of get stuck in this, like, doom cycle of guilt around, like, I haven't returned this book, so I can't go back there. So I got really into using, like, the Hennepin County, like, library app on my phone. So I just read books on my phone. So I'd stopped going in before having a kid to physical libraries, but they have, like, really awesome, like, story times at the libraries. They have really awesome times where they just, like, put out a bunch of, like, playthings for kids. The library staff are really sweet and kind. So having a kid, like, has opened up this whole other world of, like, where are free places that kids can go, and libraries are one of them. I also recently learned that Minneapolis public libraries allow people to fax for free, which is kind of cool for a lot of people that need to interact with, like, some of our systems that still use fax. So libraries, I guess, are giving me joy, and especially if you have a kid, taking your kid to story time.
I didn't know fax machines were still a thing that people needed to do.
I think, like, if you're interacting with a county, a lot of things go by fax. I don't know why that, I mean, maybe we can upgrade so that people don't still need to be using fax, but libraries, free faxing, and that's a service that people still need to use.
Well, thank you, State Rep Samantha Sencer-Mura. District 63A, one of the best districts in Minneapolis. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks. That means a lot coming from a Wedge resident.
Yeah, I like it. It's very cool. I'm over there all the time. This has been the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. Thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now, 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 right now.